The raw, desperate pressure of his mouth on mine stole the air from my lungs, a silent gasp swallowed by the kiss, lost in the sudden intimacy. His arm, a steel band, locked around my waist, pulling me closer, as if the slightest space might shatter the fragile, incandescent moment we had finally, recklessly, dared to ignite. There were no words, no polite evasions left. We had crossed a threshold etched in months of unspoken longing, communicating only in the frantic, ancient language of want, a collision of starved heartbeats, trembling skin, and the shared, painful, electrifying understanding of all that was forbidden. I never imagined a simple text message, a casual digital knock, could dislodge the carefully constructed quiet of my existence, sending tremors through the foundations of the world I had so meticulously maintained. That message arrived on a Thursday, an afternoon cloaked in the unassuming garb of the ordinary. I was standing at the kitchen window, my gaze lost in the mesmerizing dance of autumn leaves as they pirouetted across the cracked pavement outside. Behind me, the kettle sang its low, steady whistle, a familiar soundtrack to a life that had become a study in predictability. The seasons were in transition, vibrant greens surrendering to burnished golds and melancholic browns, painting the world in hues that mirrored the muted landscape of my own inner world. Everything felt achingly predictable, a soft, enveloping numbness that had become both comfort and cage. Then his name, Liam, illuminated my phone screen, a sudden spark in the dim room of my afternoon. For an ephemeral moment, an instinctive smile touched my lips, a ghost of affection for the wild-haired boy I remembered racing barefoot across my porch. Years had passed. He was a man now, with a life entirely his own. I hadn't expected to hear from him.
Hi, Eleanor. Hope you're well. Could use your eyes on my resume. Big interview coming up.
Short, polite, deceptively easy. My fingers moved before my mind could fully process a reply typed and sent with almost reflexive speed. Of course, Liam. Send it over. Happy to help. I had, in many ways, helped raise him. He was family in every way that mattered, tethered to my history by shared memories and a quiet, enduring affection. As I placed the phone on the granite countertop, a peculiar flutter stirred deep within my chest, an unfamiliar sensation, a subtle shift in the profound quiet I had worn for years, like a second skin, a ripple disturbing the placid surface of a stillness I had mistaken for peace. I shook my head, a small, dismissive gesture, blaming the autumn air for making me sentimental. But the house, usually a silent witness to my solitary routines, suddenly felt different, expectant. I moved through the kitchen, my actions imbued with a strange energy. I found myself setting out a second mug beside the kettle. I plumped the sofa cushions, wiped a non-existent smudge from the coffee table, my reflection looking back with an expression I didn't quite recognize. By the time the polite, hesitant knock sounded at my door an hour later, the flutter in my chest had intensified into a distinct, thrumming anticipation, a feeling I hadn't consciously acknowledged in years. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob. What was this agitation over a simple visit? I opened the door, and there he was, Liam, framed by the soft, slanting light of the late afternoon. He was taller than my memory served, broader. His boyishness melted into something solid and quietly self-assured. Yet, his smile, that crooked, endearingly familiar smile, hadn't changed. "Hi," he said, his voice a shade deeper but still warm. "Thanks for letting me come by on such short notice." "Of course," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady despite the frantic drumming of my heart, stepping aside. He entered, bringing with him the crisp, clean scent of the autumn air and a faint, sophisticated trace of cologne. Something warm, woodsy, and distinctly not the teenage body spray I remembered. I registered it in the narrow space as he passed. An unexpected wave of something bittersweet, a complex blend of memory, or perhaps something dangerously close to an unacknowledged longing. Was it possible to long for something you never knew you missed? We settled in the living room. Liam opened his laptop, placing it carefully on his knees. But his eyes, those clear, earnest hazel eyes, kept flickering towards me as I began to speak. As I pointed out resume edits, suggested phrasing, I felt the weight of his attention. He listened, not with distracted deference, but with the focused, engaged respect of someone who genuinely valued every word. It was a subtle shift, but it changed the dynamic, pulling taut an invisible string. At one point, I leaned closer to highlight a section, my arm inadvertently brushing his. Our shoulders touched, a fleeting electric contact so brief it could have been dismissed as accidental, but I felt it, a jolt that shot up my arm and spread like wildfire. My breath hitched. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he had felt it too. The air crackled before I pulled back, perhaps too quickly, offering a tight, overly bright smile. I launched into a rambling explanation about bullet points, my voice betraying a tremor. Liam nodded, his expression outwardly composed, but I saw something in his eyes soften, deepen, a flicker of understanding. What was happening here? When our conversation inevitably drifted from professional to personal, it happened so naturally I hardly registered the shift. He asked how things were with me, his gaze steady, sincere. "Really, Eleanor, how are you?" The emphasis on "really" was a gentle probe. I gave the polished, practiced answers. "Oh, busy, good." "Everything's fine." He didn't push. He simply watched me with that quiet, unwavering patience that made my throat tighten. Such a small word for so much unspoken truth. Fine meant a landscape of quiet loneliness, a life in muted tones. Fine meant going through motions, a choreographed dance lacking passion. Fine meant forgotten touches, silent dinners opposite a husband more roommate than partner. Liam didn't break the silence that settled. He didn't need to. His gaze was enough, a mirror reflecting the emptiness I tried to ignore. In the fixed stillness, underscored by the clock's tick-tock, I realized with painful clarity how long it had been since someone had truly seen me, looked past the facade. How long since anyone had bothered to ask, "Really?" The weight of that realization was immense. We wrapped up our session not long after. As he packed his laptop, he thanked me again, his gratitude genuine, for the help, the time, the everything I hadn't realized I was giving, or perhaps for the space I had inadvertently created. At the door he paused, hand on the knob. For a breath, or maybe a lifetime, he simply looked at me, his eyes searching, a silent question hanging between us. It felt like he was memorizing the moment. I offered another smile, too wide, too bright, a desperate attempt to inject normalcy. "Good luck with the interview, Liam," I said, my voice thinner than intended. "Thanks, Eleanor," he replied, his voice a low rumble. He stepped into the cooling dusk. I closed the door softly, hand on the frame, heart rattling. The house felt different, larger, emptier, as if holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing, just a visit. Just Liam, just a Thursday, but deep down, something older,
Wilder whispered otherwise.
Sometimes a look can say everything words are too afraid to articulate. The next time Liam visited, the late autumn sun was already descending, casting long, languid shadows across the floorboards. I had lit a small lamp, its amber glow softening the room, making old photographs on the mantel flicker as if breathing. Liam arrived with the same easy smile, a different folder tucked under his arm. I noticed his hesitation at the threshold this time, a faint shift in posture, like bracing for something invisible. "Come in," I said, my voice softer than I meant, fingers twisting the edge of my sweater. I watched him step into the golden light. We sat, as before, on opposite ends of the couch. The space between us felt careful, measured, yet charged. Every time our eyes met, and they met often, drawn by an irresistible magnetism, something wordless pulsed there, a silent, potent exchange neither of us dared name. Was this anticipation? This tight, coiling sensation? He passed me the folder, a draft of a cover letter. As I flipped through the pages, pretending to focus, I felt his gaze lingering, not invasively, but as if memorizing small details, how I brushed hair from my forehead, the faint crease of concentration, the smile at a typo. When I looked up, catching him mid-watch, he didn't flinch or look away. His gaze held mine, steady, open, a silent acknowledgement of the current flowing between us. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken words, with possibilities shimmering just beyond the permissible. I pointed out a small change, my voice deliberately light, striving for a professional tone that felt like a costume. Perhaps something a bit more active here. Liam leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine once more. This time, the touch lingered. So slight, yet it felt like everything. A jolt, sharper, a warmth spreading from that single point, igniting a slow burn. His scent, warm and faintly woodsy, curled into the space between us, settling into my chest, making my breath catch. I froze for a heartbeat. Neither of us pulled back immediately. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. It should have been nothing, an accidental contact. But my heart knew better. It hammered, a frantic drumbeat. I finally shifted, pulling away with a nervous cough, pretending to adjust the papers, avoiding his eyes. When I dared glance up, Liam offered a faint, almost apologetic smile, but something else flickered beneath, something tentative, vulnerable, raw. And was that a question in his eyes? A question I was terrified to answer, yet more terrified to ignore. We managed to finish our conversation after deliberately drifting towards neutral, safe topics: the weather, mutual acquaintances, mundane bits of life. But the undercurrent remained, a powerful, invisible tide tugging at us both, undeniable and difficult to resist. The ordinary words felt like flimsy barricades. When he eventually stood to leave, the room, usually spacious, suddenly seemed too small, too warm, the air thick. At the door, he paused again. The porch light buzzed faintly, casting a soft halo. "Thanks, Eleanor," he said, voice low, intimate, gaze locking with mine, for everything. The everything hung, laden with unspoken meanings. I nodded, throat too tight for words, gripping the door frame to steady myself against the dizzying pull. "Any time, Liam." For a second that stretched, neither of us moved. The cool night air swirled, crisp with fallen leaves and something unspoken, uniquely us. Then, with a small, hesitant smile that didn't reach his eyes, he stepped back, turning into the darkness. I watched him go, door still half open, hand pressed against the frame. It should have been nothing.
Just gratitude, just a visit. But my heart knew better.
It pounded with a rhythm both exhilarating and terrifying. Some silences aren't empty, are they? They are spaces pregnant with all the things we dare not say. What were we doing? Liam began visiting more often. Sometimes the pretext was an update on job applications, a query about interviews. Sometimes, though, there was no pretext. He would text casually, "Got a break. Mind if I stop by?" Each time, without thinking, without weighing the wisdom, I said yes. Each yes felt like a stone dropped into a still pond, ripples spreading further than I could see. The late afternoons grew colder, days shorter. Trees outside stripped bare, dark branches rattling against gray skies. Inside, I unconsciously created pockets of warmth. I lit candles, brewed tea, even started baking again. Simple things, the scent of cinnamon, a nostalgic embrace. These rituals, I realized, were not just for myself. They were for him, for the anticipation of his arrival. Liam would sit on the couch, a little closer each time, the invisible boundary shrinking. We would talk. Not about anything earth-shattering, just life. He spoke of how strange and unsteady everything felt at his age, the pressure of choices. I found myself confiding how heavy and unmoving everything sometimes felt at mine, paths not taken. I listened more than I spoke. Maybe he needed it. Or maybe his voice filled rooms inside me long empty.
His attention was a balm, his interest a quiet affirmation I hadn't realized I was starving for. Sometimes, conversations trailed into long, comfortable silences. Not awkward, but full, teeming with words neither of us could say without cracking something open between us.
Have you ever experienced a silence with someone that felt more intimate than any conversation? One bleak evening, rain lashing the window panes, he came without his laptop, without papers. Just a bag of pastries from the corner bakery, a place he knew I loved, and a smile that made my chest ache with a sweet tenderness. The gesture disarmed me. We sat by the window watching rain distort the lights. He told me about a job offer he was considering, promising but far away, another city.
I listened, expression carefully neutral, smiling, nodding. But inside, something small and fragile curled tighter, like a fist around my heart. The thought of him leaving sent a shard of unexpected pain.
At one point, describing his uncertainty, he ran fingers absent-mindedly along his mug's rim. His hand brushed mine, resting on the table. A small accidental touch, yet laden with significance. I didn't move. My skin tingled. Neither did he. His fingers stilled against mine. We sat like that, hands almost touching, breath almost held, the world shrinking to the charged inches between our skin. The rain tapped its hypnotic rhythm. I should have pulled away, broken the spell with a laugh, a word. Instead, I leaned slightly closer, pouring him more tea, my hand surprisingly steady. There are moments when silence doesn't just fill space, it erases it, leaving only a raw, undeniable connection. The air was thick with it, with the dangerous, beautiful possibility of more. The evening, it finally happened. Liam came without warning. The sky was the color of bruised plums, a heavy ash threatening a storm.
Misty rain fell steadily, blurring the world into shades of silver and blue. I had just settled into my armchair, book forgotten, when the sharp knock came. It was later than usual.
When I opened it, Liam stood there, hair damp, jacket clinging, his usual smile tight, brittle, shadows under his eyes. "Rough day?" I asked, concern in my voice, stepping aside. He shrugged, a weary gesture. "Just a bit much," he mumbled, running a hand through wet hair. "Needed to be somewhere that felt real." His words, raw, struck deeper than he perhaps intended.
Somewhere that felt real. I took his damp jacket, fingers brushing the chilled fabric, a shiver running through me. I hung it by the door, a domestic act freighted with intimacy.
He followed me into the living room, neither speaking. The house was warm, lit by the lamp and the radiator's crackle. A record spun lazily, slow, melancholic jazz. Liam sank onto the couch, elbows on knees, head bowed. I watched him, feeling the pull between us like a current growing stronger. My defenses felt like sand. With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I crossed the room, sitting beside him closer than ever, close enough to feel the heat from his skin, to smell rain and his cologne. For a long while we said nothing, the kind of nothing that screams. The air was thick with years of his quiet seeking and my quiet ache. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and looked at me. Really looked, not with gratitude or admiration, but with something deeper, raw adult. A look of desolate understanding, mirroring the emptiness I had tried to hide. My breath caught. I should have stood. Created space, drawn boundaries. My mind screamed to move, break the spell. Instead, I stayed, rooted, mesmerized by the naked vulnerability in his eyes. Liam's hand moved then, slowly, uncertainly, until his fingers brushed mine where they rested between us. A whisper of a touch. I froze, every nerve singing. He didn't move. His fingers remained lightly against mine, a silent question. Neither did I. The rain outside faded to a soft hush. The house seemed to lean closer, holding its breath. Our fingers found each other, tentative, then sure, intertwining. A lifeline. Liam's other hand came up, lifting slowly to my face. It hesitated, just long enough for me to pull away. My heart hammered. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. The first kiss was not gentle. It was messy, desperate, a raw collision of longing and release, the way cliffs crumble under relentless waves. I gasped against his mouth, the sound swallowed. He pulled me closer, his arm a vice, as if afraid the moment would shatter. We crossed that irrevocable line with no words, only the desperate language of a longing too long denied, no reason left, no hesitation. Only the inevitable crashing together of two souls circling the same quiet, profound ache. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and sorrow and a desperate, reckless hope. When we finally broke apart, gasping, foreheads resting against each other, the world outside had dissolved into inky darkness. The storm had arrived, outside and in. I closed my eyes, feeling the immense, terrifying weight of everything unleashed. I knew with chilling certainty the potential cost. And I kissed him again anyway. A deeper, slower kiss, a seal on a pact made in shadows. The morning after a storm always smells different, cleaner, as if the world pretends nothing happened. I woke on the couch, the house filled with a hollow quiet, the kind that follows something too big to name. Liam was gone. The indentation of his body lingered, the faint scent of his skin. For a moment, I sat, clutching the blanket, staring at the empty space. Reality seeped in, cold and unwelcome. The enormity of what we had done dawned with brutal clarity. I rose, limbs heavy, mind fogged. I performed acts of normalcy, made tea, fed the cat, checked emails. I smiled at the neighbor, answered my husband's brief texts with emojis and exclamation points. A charade of normalcy, pretending my world hadn't tilted on its axis. But inside, I felt hollowed out, as if the storm had taken something essential.
Liam didn't text. I didn't either. What was there to say?
The silence now was different, heavy with shared transgression, unutterable. Days passed in a fog. I went to work, cooked dinners I barely tasted, listened to my husband recount his day, while my mind drifted back to a lamplit living room, a quiet gasp between two mouths that had forgotten how to lie. The weight of it all settled differently than expected. Not just guilt, it was grief. Not for what we had done, but for the impossibility of anything more. For the beautiful, fragile thing born and dead in a single night. One afternoon, about a week later, I saw him at the farmer's market. I was buying apples, mind fumbling, when I felt the prickle of being watched. I looked up. There he was. Across the crowd, standing still while the world moved around him, Liam watched me. His face unreadable, yet his eyes held a look so raw, so vulnerable it nearly dropped me. Not anger, not regret, just the unbearable knowledge of everything we had crossed and everything we could never be. The chasm between us yawned with the reality of our separate lives. For a suspended moment, we simply looked at each other, two isolated islands. The market noise faded. There was only the silent, devastating communication. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the tide of strangers, swallowed as if he were never there. Some storms don't destroy you, do they? They leave you hollow enough to echo. Long after, echoes stayed. Seasons shifted, autumn giving way to winter. The last leaves clung stubbornly, rattling in the sharp wind, reluctant to let go. I moved through my days like a woman underwater, slow, muted, every movement an effort. I smiled when expected, laughed when required. I attended dinners, family gatherings, places where love was supposed to live, but never quite touched me anymore. The world felt dulled. At night, when the house went still, I found myself by the window, tea cooling, watching streetlights blur through mist. Liam never reached out, neither did I. The silence became absolute. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe it was the only way. But sometimes, when the house creaked, or the scent of rain drifted through an open window, I would remember. The way his fingers brushed mine, his breath on my skin. The way, for one reckless, fragile moment, I had felt something break open inside me, a feeling of being incandescently, terrifyingly alive. I never told anyone, not my husband, not friends. Not even myself, not really. I tucked it away in the quiet places of my heart, not as a wound, though there was an ache, but as proof. Proof that once I had been seen, wanted, alive. Tonight, the radio hums low, old jazz spinning lazy and slow. I wrap a blanket, cradle tea, listen to rain tap against windows. No anger. No regret. Only the faint, aching echo of a choice I would carry, quietly, always. Maybe some choices aren't meant to be undone. Maybe they remind us we are alive, capable of profound feeling. Somewhere between an old lamp's flicker and rain against the window, a heartbeat lingers. Not loud. Not pleading, Just a soft reminder that even quietest moments can carry the weight of everything we were brave enough to feel. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. What do you think? Can a memory, a feeling, be enough to sustain a part of us that yearns for more? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever pondered the echoes of choices made, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories that delve into the complexities of the human heart. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What did this story make you feel? Don't forget to like and share if Eleanor's journey touched you. It's a story we crafted with care, and we'd love to know how it made you feel.